Hi, I'm Patricia Marshall Harris, the host of Dishing with Patricia. May is designated as Mental Health Awareness Month. I've decided to focus on the growing crises called mental health. Welcome back to Dishing with Patricia. My special guest today is Dr. Melissa Chipollini. Melissa, thank you so much for agreeing to come. Tell me, give me your story. Who are you? What are you about?
Sure. So I'm a psychologist. I'm trained as a clinical psychologist, but I work more as a forensic psychologist.
Okay.
So I work with the public sector. I work with law enforcement and the legal system. I have a lot of experience working on all sides, I would say, of the legal system, from the public safety positions all the way into offenders, and I provide therapy and treatment. And
what made you get into this? What happened in your life that put you on that journey to wanting to help?
That's a good question. I think everybody that goes into this field wants to help. But I think for me in particular, so I'm an immigrant. I'm originally from Peru. I came when I was 4. So I'm fluent in Spanish. And just being an immigrant child, I think I grew up really fast, but I always had to help my family, help my community. So I started getting into a position where I was like in between two worlds, and sometimes maybe like the American world didn't really understand my family or what they were trying to say, and I would step in and kind of help them, and vice versa. Sometimes my family wouldn't really understand
Correct.
the outside world, so I would translate that, and I think that put me in a position where I wanted to work with people that the general public doesn't always understand,
right,
and hear their stories and be, in a sense, the one that can kind of like connect them with the outside world, and also kind of help the outside world understand their stories.
An advocate.
Sure, yes.
We know that there's a lot of misconception and biases that our public figures have. The police, the judicial system, even hospitals. Tell me how we can bridge that gap and change that around, because we know it exists. How can we help?
I think the help really comes in a lot of different ways, and a lot of different fields need to really come together.
Yes.
And number one, have awareness and accountability of those biases, because I think a lot of times certain systems will want to say, you know, oh, maybe in the past it was like that, but now it's not. And as we see, that's just not true. So I think having awareness and accountability of the things that exist is number one. And then number two, doing something about how that affects our society, right? So in my neck of the woods, so to speak, with psychology, adults, or I've treated a lot of adolescents, whether it's been in and out of like judicial systems or just, you know, regular like outpatient therapy, but I've treated a lot of individuals who have been brought up with experiences of racism or discrimination, and how that affects them, right? Like that is a trauma, and I think our society doesn't necessarily embrace it as such, but it is, and then that has effects on how that individual is going to see themselves and their identity, interact with others in the world, and especially interact with people in authority figures as well, right? And so all of those things need to be brought into the individual's awareness and dealt with, because I think there's also a lot of pain that comes there when you're misunderstood.
Not only do I think that we need representation of whatever your race or your gender is across the board in our society, but particularly in the public service area, that we need someone that is there to help represent us. So when you're having, just for example, when you have someone that is going before the court system, or someone that is getting their green card, or all of these types of things, don't you think it's important that they have an advocate? Because there is a miscommunication with what someone says versus what someone writes.
Absolutely. I think that would be a great thing to have. Logistically, I know, unfortunately, working in some of these systems, like funding is rarely there, and I think a lot of the times it comes down to issues of like time and money, and unfortunately a lot of these systems that should have a lot of like kind of extra support for of those things have the opposite, and people are overtired, they're overworked, and that is another thing that I think we don't often talk about, that when the human body is not at its peak, right? If we're stressed out, if we're tired, if we're hungry, we just do not operate at our best capacity, and then that's when we kind of operate as a default. And that then translates to a lot of the times when people are in that state, biases that they might have are more likely to come out because they're operating with less kind of control than if you're, if you're well rested and if you're paid well and everything's great in the world, then you're able to have a little bit more self-control. And if you have, biased thoughts that pop through your head, you might have the capability of being like, wait, no, let me think this through, let me find a way of understanding the person and coming to terms. But if you're exhausted, you don't really have the time and space to do that, and you just kind of operate on what is that quick thing that I can remember. So I think one way of kind of helping with things would be helping the personnel in these systems. And I think there's often a lot of training on these topics, which is great. We always want more education and help people learn about other people of other cultures or other genders or just kind of other groups than themselves, because through exposure is how we really break a lot of these biases. But I think there's also something about making sure that our people are well, mentally, physically, yes, in all senses, so that they can use the tools that we teach them in these critical moments.
In Colorado, they did a trial study. I don't know if it's going to continue ongoing, that when someone is having a mental crisis, they don't call the police department. Mm-hmm. They call social services, and they always have a mental health advocate there, because once you call the police, things change. Can you tell me something? I mean, we know that the police traditionally, we thought they were there to help, but sometimes they escalate a situation instead of de-escalating the situation. Someone that is inexperienced, that doesn't speak very much English, how do we diffuse a situation before it gets out of hand?
If you have more representation, then for these examples, and maybe you have somebody who speaks the language and then can go translate, right? Maybe you just have more bodies, and therefore people can, there's power in numbers, so people can de-escalate the situation. But that aside, on the individual level, I think the things that we can do is almost just kind of try and de-escalating ourselves, and also being aware of our own biases and triggers, right? Because the reality is we might also have some biases against authority figures, right? And that probably comes from either own experience or family members' experiences, right? Whether I lived through something or I heard of something from so-and-so and
right,
from 10 people, then it's like, oh, of course it's going to happen to me. So, and people often don't talk about that, right? Like secondhand trauma, that it doesn't have to have happened to you, but hearing about it and being so close to it is just as traumatizing for you as well, right? So I think having that awareness, right, that okay, I'm probably going to feel this bias in this situation. If police are getting involved in a situation, there's probably something going on, so I'm going to be afraid, naturally, like anybody would be. And so how can I manage myself so that I can be as cognitively aware of how to handle the situation?
You're in a group of teenagers. You're sitting there and you're talking with them. Tell me something that you would suggest to them that would ensure, if they have a confrontation with someone of authority, that they're able to leave that room. They're not going to be hurt. So tell me some things that maybe you can say to them if this situation happens to you, because so often now we have to help de-escalate the issue while they're escalating the issue, and we're over hyper trying to explain. Give me some things that's going to save somebody's life.
I think sometimes just taking a breath, right? And recognizing okay, this is a really scary situation for me. Let me take a breath and try and calm myself. And for the record, I don't know that it's fair that it's on us as civilians or necessarily on children, right, to be the ones that are having to de-escalate themselves and in turn de-escalate the whole situation. But aside from that, that's where we're at. And so doing the things to kind of self-soothe yourself and bring your emotion down enough so that you can then respond like thinking. Because any human being, right, especially children, but any of us, if we're too emotionally active, we're not thinking.
Right.
There's just no way, right? We're just acting based on emotion. So I would suggest, take some deep breaths, think of something that's calming, think of, a place that you like. I'm a beach person, so if I think about the beach, that's gonna calm me down. Doing something like that, right? And maybe calling somebody, like calling mom, calling dad, calling teacher, grandma, whoever you think of that could, be safe in that situation. And maybe even just kind of talking about that, just openly saying like, hey, so-and-so, like, I'm a little scared right now. I don't want to say the wrong thing. I don't want to do the wrong thing. I'm not trying to hurt you. I'm not trying to do anything. I think that would also be helpful, because I think a lot of the times what happens that makes the situation escalate is miscommunication. And everybody is scared. And so when both sides are scared, they immediately think, oh, this is the enemy, right? Because we're human beings and we're animals as well, if you think about it. And so when we feel threatened, the instinct is either to fight back or to run or to pause and not do anything, but really is to protect ourselves. And so I think if we look at it that way, when things de-escalate, both parties are threatened, both parties feel afraid, and so they just sense anything that the other party is doing as proof that there's a threat. So I think being able to call that out, like, hey, I know we're both scared here, so how can we work through that? Let's both calm down, let's try and bring it down so that we can get to the common goal, right? And the common goal being, we're both leaving here without any issues.
Right, without any issues. We know that there are a lot of narcissistic personalities going on in our world right now. How do we maneuver that minefield? They may be your boss. It could be the person sitting next to you. How do we do that? What are the skills that we need to do? And to recognize it. That this person is like, they got some stuff going on, but I can't leave. This is my job. It could be the CEO of that company. This is my job. I got to feed my children. So that stress brings on some mental issues for you, yourself, as the person. So, and I need this job. So tell me, what can I do to help me keep my job without being victimized at the same time?
Sure. It's funny you mentioned that, because in the world of therapy, what you're saying, right, narcissistic personality disorder, there's a whole list of different personality disorders, but that's the one that's getting a lot of attention these days. But we always, as therapists, we joke around and we say, whenever people are coming to therapy, it's usually because they're the ones trying to manage their life with a individual who has a personality disorder. So like, we're rarely treating the individual with the disorder, but we're treating the people around them who's trying to cope with what's going on. So it's funny you mentioned that, but unfortunately, I don't think that there is anything like concrete that we can say, this is how you know, and if they have this, it's a done deal. Because a personality disorder is really hard to diagnose. I can have my suspicions, and especially the younger that an individual is, they can have some traits, but that doesn't mean that it's fully to that disorder. So I think a lot of the times now with like social media and things like that, we're getting a little bit of misinformation, thinking that it's more prevalent in the population than it really is. But with that said, I think when people have narcissistic traits, like what we tend to see as common in the population is like a lack of empathy. So they might be pretty self-centered and only think about their goals and what they want and disregard how it might affect other people. They might have trouble really knowing or perceiving how their actions and their words affects other people. And those are typically the things that we're like, how do I deal with this?
Right.
So I always advocate for having really strong boundaries with yourself. And if something feels wrong, it is wrong. And it doesn't mean, sometimes you can't prove it. I think individuals who have a narcissistic personality disorder will often have trouble perceiving the same things that you might be perceiving because of this lack of awareness for themselves. So you can sit there until you're blue in the face trying to get them to understand, and they're just not. And that's okay, right? Like, getting them to understand that they hurt you doesn't stop them from hurting you. So what you can do is, again, set those boundaries. If I don't like this, what are you going to do to not have it happen? Not how are you going to stop them from doing it, because we can't.
But you're setting your boundaries, what you will not allow.
Exactly.
And just set that.
How do I take myself out
How do you take yourself out of that? And then you spoke on forensic
yes.
sides. So how do you apply that to your community and in your job and in your day-to-day life? How do we, because we think of forensics, we think of, oh my God, you went to a crime scene, that this is this. So tell us what actually is forensic. I mean, in your profession, because forensic, as I just said, we're thinking, oh, they're collecting blood, they're doing this, and that's not so.
No, I'm not collecting blood. So forensic psychology is the side of psychology that, I guess the way to summarize it is that deals with the legal system. So often we are doing therapy or evaluations within like the jail system. At the outpatient level, I've treated individuals who have come out of the jail system and are either on probation or on parole. And therapy is like a stipulation of the requirements. I've often dealt with individuals that we need to evaluate for the court, especially like in a state hospital, and seeing if they are either mentally stable to come home.
What's important is that we recognize that people, they go to jail for any myriad of reasons, but they need therapy too to come back into our society.
Absolutely.
And that's something that we have to advocate towards. So what is that approach? Is that necessarily just all in the legal system, or once they're no longer in jail and they've done with their probation, that they're no longer responsible to get treatment for therapy?
Some individuals are considered needing to have therapy forever.
So I want to go back to the issue of police and dealing with mental health issues. We've seen on television that, people call the police and they've stipulated my child is in a mental crisis. I'm telling you ahead of time, when they're calling 911, they're saying, can you send a mental health professional instead of the police? Shouldn't there be some system instead of 911, maybe 622 or something, that lets them know that it is a mental crisis versus a police crisis?
For sure. I think that would be an excellent idea. I know that they've been working on a number, like a 3-digit number for suicide.
Yes.
So yeah, I think that would be an excellent idea to have something that distinguishes from this, we need police or we need help because there's a crime, versus we need help because this individual is really sick and we don't know what to do with it. I know the city or various cities in the country have mobile crisis units where you can call those units and pretty much say that this individual is experiencing mental health symptoms, we need help, but that's usually we need to get them to a hospital. And so they will come, and it's mental health professionals, so they'll come and they'll take care of that person and they'll send them to a hospital. The issue with that is not a lot of people know that. I didn't even know that until I started working in the field. Right. And with insurances, I was told this is something that we can tell our clients or our patients, if this ever happens, utilize this tool, but it's not something that's widely known. But I think maybe something that would help is getting that more awareness of that to the public, so that people themselves can differentiate and say, okay, this is more of a mental health issue. Let's call crisis instead of the police, right? Because I think as a society, we know anytime I need help, the immediate
call the police. Yes, call the police.
Right.
In the ideal world, can you help tell my audience some things that's going to help us maneuver through this minefield of mental health crisis from the legal system, because you're in the legal system, but just that's going to, as you just said, make sure we get home the next day, or to recognize something that you could say, hey, you know, that person is having an issue. How can we help them? So, you know, if your family, you're going home for Easter dinner, what would be some things that you say to some of your young cousins or your brother, your sister, say, I love you, but I want you to come home. These are the things that is going to help you get home because of the biases that is going on in our world, that they too have mental issues.
Yeah, I mean, I think something that might be helpful is just having people remember, like, kind of what you said, there's a lot of biases out in the world, and the reality is we don't know what's going on in somebody's mind. So if you're seeing a situation and something inside of you is like, I don't know about this, something seems off about this person, you might not know, and frankly, you know, the community aren't trained professionals, and you shouldn't really know, right? You shouldn't be able to tell right off the bat what's going on with somebody. But I think we all have a sense of self, and we can kind of tell, like, something is just not clicking with this individual, right? And so if you find yourself in that situation, I think determining, is it best for me to just step away and kind of protect myself and move away from the issue? Or if you really feel inclined, then calling for help and just stating what you're seeing. And maybe, I think like we talked about before, reiterating, hey, I'm not in threat. This person is not a danger to me. They're not being violent. They're not threatening me. I'm not threatening them. You know, there's no threat going on here. I just think they're sick, and I think that they need help. Who can best help me? Is it police if I'm calling 911? Can I call a different number? I think something to remember too, though, is I think often we find individuals who are mentally unstable or going through like a emotional instability, and it can be frightening to the untrained eye.
Yes. And
we can often perceive it as a threat. They're going to be violent towards me. They're going to hurt me. And that's often not the case. Often, well, if somebody is having like moments of emotional instability, or if they're having a psychotic episode where they're seeing things or hearing things or perceiving reality in a distorted or in a different way, then the risk is there, of course, but it doesn't have to be. And so something that we can do is calm that down too. Maybe instead of reminding ourselves that they're not going to hurt me if I don't hurt them, and also saying, I'm not here to hurt you. I'm not here to threaten you. Because often when an individual is dysregulated like that, they're perceiving you as a threat, or they're hurt, or they're afraid, right? So also just reminding them, like, everything is fine.
So the family, if the family called, they should kind of step in immediately, say, this is why I'm calling you. They're having a try to explain that, to de-escalate the situation before it's escalated and someone goes home hurt. I thank you. So part of Dishing with Patricia is we believe that food is medicine. So our tea that we're drinking is hibiscus and ginger, which is good for us. My recipe for this tea will be on my website, because ginger and then hibiscus helps in lowering the blood pressure.
Yeah.
And all of these things, we need to also be concerned about what we're eating when we're in a stressful situation. That also allows us to maneuver. You got to eat healthy. You got to keep a clear mind. So I thank you, Melissa, for coming.
No problem. And I thank you for doing this and having this platform, because I really think in order to be able to advocate, we need the platform to really educate the public, educate the people in the system, educate all of the community on mental health and what it looks like and what it doesn't look like, to, you know, spread that knowledge so that we can do these things that we're talking about.
Well, thank you so much. So until next time, bye.